I don't usually let congregants in on my sermon writing secrets, but since I like this crowd, I figure, sure, why not? I usually have each week a scholarly pile of books that I look at when I'm preparing to write my sermon every week. And right on top of that scholarly pile of books is a syndicated column of Dick Yarborough, who writes a column in the Marietta Daily Journal each and every week. And I like reading Yarborough for two reasons. The first is that he claims that each week that he writes, he gets two piles of angry letters. The first are from conservatives accusing him of being biased, and the second is from a pile of liberals accusing him of being biased. And I like that very much about him. The other thing that I really like about Yarborough that makes his columns particularly unique is that when he's trying to figure out what the pulse is on hot-button issues, he drives to breakfast clubs in restaurants all over Georgia and meets people to find out what they are saying. In the last column, I think he met with two guys named Skeeter and Gus. And what's great about his columns is that you always walk away feeling quite heartened because the people that he speaks to are eminently reasonable, which I have to tell you is quite refreshing because the breakfast club that I attend is the complete opposite. Its members are demanding, they are in a rush, they whine all the time. Of course, I'm talking about breakfast with my own children. However, in this past week's column, Yarborough writes about something else entirely. He writes about his trip to get tested for COVID-19. He is vaccinated, and he was overjoyed to find out that his results were negative. And so in a moment of inspiration, he was inspired. He realized, it dawned on him that unlike flashlight batteries, where negative is negative and positive is positive, COVID testing reminded him that there are cases in life where negative means positive. Yarborough writes that he grew up without the internet. Can any of our children here think about or even fathom a day in the life without having internet? Well, Yarborough writes he gets thousands of emails every day. Could he only imagine without internet? Yes, he could. A negative would be a positive. He writes that there was an era where he did not grow up with caller ID or with voicemail. And remarkably, he writes, people would call him back and it was fine. And he didn't get robocalls either. And of course, his last little shot he takes are at cell phones, which he writes that God forbid means that a family of 5 would sit down at a restaurant and they might actually talk to one another instead of just pulling out their phones and reading or looking at the same time. All of those things, according to Yarborough, are negatives that mean positive. And so he concludes, quote, maybe those days weren't as perfect as I make them out to be, but there wasn't a whole lot about them that was negative either. Of that, I am positive. Our Sedra this week, Tavo, tells the stories of the Israelites, and they are on the threshold of entering Eretz Yisrael. And it is here in this moment that the Torah chooses to recall our history. Only surprisingly, the history of the Jews is not so grandiose, it's not positive, it's quite negative. The history we read this week is of our ancestor who was a wandering Aramean. Not some great prince or king from royal stock or Abraham. Just a wandering Aramean, a negative. The Egyptians oppressed us. We were in slavery for 400 years. Again, not a positive, a negative. And yet what is even more surprising about this particular account of our history is that who is it that's supposed to recite it? A farmer, bringing his or her first fruits from the land of Israel to the temple. That, of course, is quite a positive moment. And so why, you may be asking, would our recollection of our history in this moment be something negative? So much so that the Torah commentator known as the Or HaChaim says that the words va'anita, that ordinarily have to do with answering, can also mean va'anita, and you are poor, ani. It's like the farmer is saying, woe is me and woe is my wealth, in what should be a moment of triumph. Sitting here today, thinking about Dick Yarborough's column, I think we all know the answer to the question I just posed. It is because Jews have always been a people for whom negative means positive. The farmer in our Torah is not just a simple farmer, but for this Israelite, this is a passage and a moment of triumph where he finds himself as part of the larger story, the Israelite story, the Jewish story, of turning negatives into positives. And the High Holy Days, our Shlichat Tzibor is going to sing the words, Zacharti la chesed ne'urayich. God says, I remember you when you were young and wonderful and innocent in the desert. Positive, right? Only God conveniently forgets that the 40 years in the desert in the Torah we read about were terrible years for the Israelites. They were rebellious. They didn't listen. Those of us who have children know what this is like. It's called selective memory, right? We all know what's going to happen in the next 1,000 years, too. Jewish people are going to be expelled from country after country, time after time, a huge negative. What did we, the Jewish people, do? We convened a Congress, a Zionist Congress in 1897, Basel, Switzerland. We took that negative, we demanded our own Jewish state, and we got it 50 years later. As Jews, we've never allowed the great negative of anti-Semitism to destroy us. We let it build our people and bring us closer together when the world won't let us forget that we are Jews. You know, thinking about the world we live in right now, with everything going on, especially in our local schools, those of us with children and in the world, we all spend so much time focusing on the negative. And I want to acknowledge there is an awful lot of negative to focus on right now. But the question I want to ask this Shabbat, in this moment of negativity, is how we as Jews and as human beings are going to take those negatives and make them mean positive. Because that's what we have always done. You know, I don't know about you, but this negative has made me realize just how grateful I must be for the things I once took for granted. My health, my family, my home, modern medicines like vaccines. I've also become so grateful for my support network, especially our village in the synagogue, the wonderful people I work with and my family. And if you need any evidence that this synagogue is in a village, just take a look at the Torah reading gamut we had this morning and the Aliyah gamut we had this morning. My gratitude for all of these things helps me to rededicate myself to our faith. The pandemic has also enabled our synagogue to take a quantum leap forward to become the inclusive community we always knew we could be, because people thousands of miles away, I'm not sure how far Connecticut is from here, but it's far away, can attend family smachot, religious services, even funerals, and shivas in a way we've never been able to do before. That's negative, that means positive. As I said, there are so many negatives we could all complain about this Shabbat. But the challenge for us in this room and those of us at home is to be like the farmer and to realize there are negatives that can be positive. It's a lesson for all of us. And I want to say personally that I look forward to sharing that lesson at my breakfast club come tomorrow morning. Shabbat Shalom.